Well, then we'll just get talking. You guys, this is Brandon Burns with Vanguard 1031 Exchange. There's a couple different 1031 Exchange people out there, but I'll tell you what, Brandon's the only one I've ever talked to where he answers his phone almost every time and always gets back to you. I mean, every time. I've never had a situation where Brandon hasn't gotten back to me. I love that, so it means a lot to me. So I was like, Brandon's our guy, here we go. I think he does a lot of work with Brandon as well.
Yeah.
Right? Over Siri, and they're like, oh, Brandon's our guy too.
Yeah.
So anyways, Brandon Burns going to teach us all about 1031 exchanges, and I'm actually really interested, in the entire topic, but the whole idea behind a reverse 1031 exchange as well. That's what got me super excited about the class. I'll be honest, my 24th year in mortgage biz, and this is my first 1031 exchange class I've ever been on. So I've been winging it for quite a while.
Well, it's about time.
So here we go.
So
No.
we closed one, Josh,
Yeah.
with Brandon.
Yeah.
Oh, did we?
For a friend of mine.
Yeah.
There we go.
Like
Even
a
better.
year and a half ago, yeah.
Really
Great
well.
job, Brandon.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for that great introduction. My name's Brandon, I'm the 1031 guy. So I wear the 1031 pin a lot. Sometimes, as I was telling you guys, people ask me, like, hey, do you love Halloween that much? And the answer is yes, Halloween is great, but I love 1031 exchanges even more. And I think 1031 exchanges are really, really powerful, especially in this moment here in San Diego, Southern California, because what's happened a lot is most of the people that own single family or small multifamily investment properties are not sophisticated. So a really specific example, one of my friends, she has a triplex in Escondido. She bought it about 10 years ago. Her husband recently passed away. She's a nurse. And so she was telling me, she's like, yeah, Brandon, you know, I'm just really grateful, you know, some of these tough things I'm going through. But I've got the best tenants in the world. She, you know, it's 3 units. It's a front house and a duplex behind it, and she lives in one of the units. And I said, oh, that's great. I'm so happy for you. Why is this? Why do you have the best tenants in the world? She said, well, they actually paid rent early this month. I said, oh, that's fantastic. How much did they pay you? And she's like, well, the house paid me $1,500 and the other unit paid me $1,000. So, well, how big is the house? Like four bedrooms. I said, yeah, well, I would have paid you early. I would have paid you for a whole year, right? So where she's at, she owns these 3 units and she's getting really below market rents, right? And she's a nice person, right? Like she likes her tenants. She interacts with them pretty consistently, right? And it's hard for her to go to her tenants and be like, okay, I know you've been paying $1,500 a month for 10 years. However, you're now going to pay $5,000 a month, right? That's a tough conversation for her to have, and probably not one that she's going to do. So I told her what you need to do is sell your property, don't pay taxes. You can 1031 exchange, and actually so there's 2 parts of the tax code. To take a quick step back from the story, there's 2 parts of the tax code that give property owners a tax break. Section 121 is when you own your residence, you get $250 tax-free or $500, you know, we know that. And then Section 1031 is for investment property, rolling it over to another investment property. What a lot of people don't know, there are some times where you can combine 121 and a 1031, which can be really powerful. If you lived in a house recently and now it's a rental within the last 2 or 3 years, you can take $250, $500, put it in your pocket, 1031 exchange the rest. Or if it's a multi-unit situation and you live in one of the units, you can potentially also do that. So that's kind of cool.
That's actually really cool. How often does that happen? Pretty rare? That's great.
At least once a month. I mean, but I also do like 40, 50 exchanges a month.
Yeah, and you can do, if you're a married couple, you can do $500,000, put it in your pocket, 1031 exchange the rest.
Yeah.
Let's say you lived in a duplex.
Yeah.
And it's been rented out the entire time.
Yeah.
Or if you lived in a single family home and that was your primary residence for like 5 years, you moved out 2 years ago.
Yep.
You could sell, take the money, 1031 exchange the rest.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
So Section 121 says that you just have to live, you just have to live in the property 24 out of the previous 60 months. So as long as you've lived in it 24, now sometimes people get outside that. I had talked to somebody yesterday and they were like, yeah, I moved out in August of 2020. I'm like, you're too late at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there are times where it can work and that can be powerful, right?
Yeah.
So going back to my story, that's what I told my friend to do. I'm like, you should sell this, You can put money in your pocket and literally buy something. It could even be on the same street. Like you don't even have to change your neighborhood, right? And that can be a big difference for this lady who's a nurse with a kid, widowed. Her income would go from $2,500 a month from her rental property to, I don't know, $6,000. I mean, tripled. That's really dramatic, right? So she said, I'm not going to do it. I said, okay, it's your life, you live it.
What's the max increase year on year? 10% that you could raise your rent?
So
for California?
It's like, I forget the exact amount, but it's on top of an inflation number. So I think last year it was 10%, but it's tied to an inflation number, so it moves around a little bit each year.
I didn't know there was a max.
There is, but I don't think it applies to single family. It might, probably does.
Rent.
I think in general, all the states. I just know in California, there's a max. We talked about condo up in Lake Forest.
Yeah, that's right. There's
a max.
Yep.
Look at this, says the Tenant Protection Act. Didn't know about that. Caps rent increases for most residential tenants in California. Landlords cannot raise rent more than 10% total.
Oh, you're right then.
Or 5% plus the percentage change in the cost of living, whichever is lower over a 12-month period. Interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
I'm just saying she can ease it up if she wants or have that tough conversation.
Yeah. Or maybe if rents are continuing to go up, she might never be able to bring it to market rent. Is the other side of that coin, right?
Yeah, probably won't.
But you're right. Certainly could ease it up over time. But she came to me and she said, 6 months later, she came to me and she said, Brandon, you were right. I made a terrible mistake. I said, well, why? She said, my tenants who, when she bought the property in 2013, the tenant was living in the front house, paying $1,500. They've come to her and they said, we need new windows. And she got an estimate for new windows and it was over $30,000. So for her to cover a $30,000 expense, that's going to eat up more than a year in rent, probably more than a year and a half, right? So these are things that I think people don't think about, right? A nurse isn't going to think about this. A typical property owner isn't going to think about this. And I think it's important for us to be able to have that conversation with them. And so I want to run through kind of the key things that are important to be aware of as we're having these type of conversations with people, right? So there's 4 major hurdles in doing a forward exchange. So there's 3 types of exchanges you can do. A forward exchange, which is a typical common sell a property, buy a property. A reverse exchange, which is buy a property, then sell what you have. Or a build to suit exchange, where you can use some of the leftover equity to improve a project within that 180-day time window. But most people do a forward or delayed exchange. So sell a property, buy a property. There's 4 major hurdles, and it applies to really all exchanges. The first hurdle is a time component. So once someone sells, there's 2 clocks that start, and most people know this hurdle, right? 45 days to come up with a plan, the identification timeline, and 180 days to close on the replacement property. So the 180-day, the IRS enforces, it's really intense. The 45-day, just by midnight, you have to have written down a number of replacement properties that you may or may not end up purchasing.
So not in escrow.
Doesn't have to be in escrow.
Got it.
You could identify this building, Horton Plaza, and shops at Carlsbad.
45 days.
Just to come up with a plan and write down a couple you might buy.
180 days to execute.
Yep.
Can you get extensions?
No. The IRS does not want you to have this anyway.
Yeah.
And they're not going to give you an extension. They're not going to be nice. They're not warm. They're not cuddly.
They
want that money.
And then the property that you buy, maybe you're getting this, is always got to be the same price or more?
That's hurdle number 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so totally. No. So most people know the time component hurdle. Not as many people know the value hurdle. So the IRS wants the same amount of money essentially to stay in the economy. So, however, a lot of times people think, and I think this is a rational thought, well, if I bought a property for $500,000, I'm now selling it for $1 million, I only have to roll my profits over, right? But that's not how the IRS looks at it. The IRS is saying for a taxable event to occur, 2 things have to happen. 1, you have to make money. 2, you have to take possession of that money. So if you sell $1 million property, you've got to buy 1 or more properties that equal or exceed $1 million.
So it could be 2 properties.
It could be 5 properties. It could be 10 properties.
As long as it exceeds $1 million.
Yep. Whatever your sales price is. Now you can deduct what the IRS calls permissible non-optional closing expenses, which in California is the cost of the people that worked on the sale.
Yeah.
So that's the real estate commission, the title, the escrow, the 1031 exchange. What that is not is that's not an inspection. That's not any loan prepayment penalties,
Yeah.
Or other things. It's pretty much limited to the cost of the people that worked on your sale.
But not closing costs.
Not all closing costs.
Not all closing costs.
Yeah.
Okay. So really, which isn't that big of a chunk anyways, but it's definitely the real estate commissions. Okay.
Definitely, that's the biggest piece.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but that's important to know. And you can sell an unlimited number of properties and go into one, or sell one and go into an unlimited number of properties. I had a client that sold a triplex in OB 2 years ago, and he had a travel nurse relationship, and he wanted to have the freedom to be able to travel with her. And I'm not sure his job afforded him that at the time. And so he said, I need cash flow from my real estate. And San Diego is a great place to make money on your real estate, right? To get that appreciation, but it's a harder place to get cash flow. So he sold his triplex and he bought a number of single family homes in Columbus, Ohio. Huh. So, in Columbus, Ohio, they cash flow really well, but they maybe aren't going to appreciate. So he kind of swapped because of his needs. Yeah. And I can't remember how many he bought, like 8 or 10. Wow. So, you can sell one, buy 10, yeah, or whatever. But it's important to note that if you buy less in value of what was sold, then the IRS is going to make you pay taxes on the variance, on the difference. So it's not an all or nothing thing. I talked to a guy a few days ago, and he was like, hey, I'm selling a property for 1.2. He said, I owe 200 grand on it. I really don't want to replace that. Can I still do an exchange? I said, sure, yeah. He bought it for 400 or 500, 20 years ago. And if he doesn't replace the debt, just takes all his cash and puts it in another property, and is essentially buying 200,000 less, he's going to get taxed on that 200,000, but he's not going to get taxed on the rest. Yeah. So it's a partial exchange.
Yeah. So you can be debt free on all your properties. You're cash flowing even more. You get hit
totally.
with 200,000, which whatever the tax rate is
roughly going to have to write a third.
Right. Right. And then the 1031 exchange does all those calculations for the taxes right there on the spot, right? Is that part of what they do?
No. So a 1031 exchange just keeps a taxable event from happening. Yeah. So as a 1031 exchange company, what we do is we create paperwork before the sale. We make sure that escrow does things compliantly, and we hold people's hand and consult and advise them along the way. I mean, we did that with you guys, and make sure people know what the rules are and what happens. Yeah. Like this guy who is selling for 1.2, right? He's like, hey, what happens if I don't replace the whole value? He knew that he needed to, but he wasn't sure if there was a partial exchange that he could do. Yeah. So we hold their hands along the way, and then repeat the same thing on the replacement property. Yeah. Prepare legal docs, make sure things are compliant, make sure the money gets there, and then escrow the funds in the meantime. Yep.
The client sells a house.
Yeah.
Are they supposed to be involved with the exchange company during their escrow, the sell? Because if they sell and take the money, or the money goes into the escrow company, can they get involved? Like I had a client I was talking about yesterday. Yeah. They're not involved with an exchange company, so I don't think, can they not do it anymore?
When the sale occurs, that's kind of the deadline. Yeah. So I've had people call me on a Friday and be like, hey, we have a closing Monday, and we're able to help them, no problem. I've also had people call and say, hey, I closed on Monday, now it's Thursday, and it's been too late.
Yeah. So they can be in escrow and still reach.
Yeah, totally.
Not closing.
They just can't close. Yeah.
That's actually a great point.
That is a great point. And that's hurdle number 3 is financial. So once a close occurs, the seller can't have receipt of the funds. So escrow is not going to hold on to that money, right? They're going to send it somewhere. And so that's part of the role of the 1031 exchange company, is we escrow those funds in between the sale and the buy. When escrow's like, hey, we're going to get rid of them, right? By law, I think actually they have to get rid of them. And so they send it, we hold it in a trust account, and it's safe. But that way somebody doesn't have receipt of it. The tax code actually says the seller can't have constructive receipt. So not only can they not touch the money, but they can't get any benefit from it. So constructive receipt means that like they can't take out a loan with that as collateral or something like that. So hurdle number 3 is they can't touch any of the money, have to use a 1031 exchange company. Tax code calls it a qualified intermediary. Most people call it a 1031 exchange company. Yeah. And then hurdle number 4 is continuity of the taxpayer. So the IRS wants to track those deferred taxes over time. If you change who's on title before you sell or after you sell, there's a clear record, right? There's a notarized deed, it's publicly filed. If you change the taxpayer that's on title in the middle of the exchange, then the IRS kind of loses track of what's happening. So if you and I were in a partnership and we sold, and then I bought just personally, the sale is going to show up on our partnership return and the purchase is going to show up on my personal return. The IRS can't make sense of it, so they just disallow it.
Yeah.
So it's important to know. Now, on the lending side, a lot of times people who have investment properties will put them inside an LLC, and then they need to get a loan on the replacement property, maybe under their personal name. So we run into that occasionally. So what we do in that situation is have them close under their personal name and do the loan as they're closing, and then immediately after, same day, put it back in the LLC. So there's that continuity of taxpayer.
And I think from a lending side and a real estate side, I mean, the very first thing you'd ever do once you get something like this is like, you gotta talk to a professional.
Yeah.
Screw up one step.
Yep.
And that's
Right.
That's a big mistake.
Yeah. They can make a difference.
We're in 11 states now?
Yeah, 13,
13 states?
Cool.
Are you?
Yeah, we're national.
You're national.
So our headquarters are here. We're in Solana Beach, and have an office in Dallas and an office in Miami.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Those are good places to go.
Good. I like being here the most.
Right.
But so those are the key things. So now let's talk about reverse exchanges. Those are becoming more and more popular. So with a reverse exchange, you buy something prior to selling what you have, right? So that takes a lot of the risk off the table. If somebody's got a property that maybe they have a really low tax basis on, or that they've owned for a long time, and maybe they've kind of maxed the value, right? Maybe they've got a condo in Solana Beach, it's worth $2.5 million. Is it ever going to be worth $5 million? Maybe not, right? So it might make sense to take that and put it in something that's going to continue to appreciate. But maybe somebody says, hey, I like my condo in Solana Beach, but I really just am not comfortable selling it and then hoping to God I can find something great in the current environment, low inventory environment we're in, right? So what they can do is they can go buy something, then they can sell that condo in Solana Beach. Now, it's a bit more complicated because one of the rules for a 1031 exchange is you can't exchange into a property you already own. So about 15 or 16 years ago, the IRS came out and said, okay, we know this needs to happen, so here's how we want it done. They want what's called a parking situation, and they want the title on the property that's being purchased to be parked. So the way that they've asked for that to be done is the qualified intermediary, it's my company, creates a special purpose entity called an exchange accommodation title holder. And the seller is a member of that entity. The 1031 exchange company is the owner or manager of that entity. Then there's a 60-page legal document called the Qualified Exchange Accommodation Agreement that assigns all the rights to the seller. So they get a lease for $0.0. The money they're putting in is a loan to themselves. And other things. They have all the signing rights, right? So effectively they're the owner, but they're not technically on title. Then they go sell what they have and do an exchange into this property where title is parked for a little bit. Now, the benefits of that, it takes all the risk off the table. The timelines are different. So the 45-day deadline goes away because you don't need to identify a replacement property because you're already closed on it, right? And then the 180-day deadline, if you can get it done in that time frame, the IRS calls it a safe harbor reverse. However, if it takes longer, the IRS calls it a non-safe harbor reverse. 3 times in the history of ever, they've challenged reverse exchanges that have taken years. All 3 times they've lost. So I tell people like, hey, there's a small amount of risk if it takes longer than 180 days. You could be the first person in the history of ever that this happens to, but the chances are really low.
Yeah.
However, with a forward exchange, if you take 181 days, the IRS comes at you with a hammer.
Yeah.
So that deadline is really intense with a forward, and it's not as aggressive with a reverse, which is nice.
Back to the reverse.
Yeah.
Have you found that lenders don't want to provide a loan to an entity that does, if it's not
That's my next.
guaranteed?
So
Because that's going to be,
the
you always have to pay cash for the property with your own cash.
or hard money. So
Yeah.
the way that I typically communicate it is it's really difficult to have a long-term financing situation when there's a temporary title situation.
If I can interject,
Yeah.
when you're most traditional lenders, I mean almost all of them, they don't want to lend to an entity because an entity can go bankrupt and back out.
Right.
There's all kinds of problems. Versus they want a person guaranteed, and this is where that becomes a problem.
And the entity is even weirder because it's a brand new entity
Totally.
that's owned by a QI, but the QI isn't in charge of anything.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. First Republic used to do it. I haven't seen anyone else that's been able to do long-term financing in a reverse exchange situation. So half the clients, so I do about 50 of those a year, about half the clients just have the cash, and then half go get hard money.
Yeah.
And while it's certainly not ideal to pay the cost for hard money, that's often a lot less than the tax. Yeah. So from just from a 1031 exchange standpoint, a forward exchange is about $1,200 all in.
Wow.
It's $1,000 when you sell, $995 when you sell, $295 when you buy, goes on the settlement statement. A reverse exchange is $8,000. So that's because there's a lot more legal costs, there's a lot more title costs. To create the entity, you have to put it on title, have to take it off title, have to hire an attorney, drop this long legal document, create a promissory note, a lease, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
On the reverse?
Yeah.
At what point do we get a 1030, get you involved? Like if I'm like, okay, I'm gonna buy this place, I'm gonna do a reverse,
Yeah.
right? I'm getting involved while I'm buying that place, I'm assuming?
Yeah. So usually I'm brought into the conversation when somebody's making offers because they're like, hey, I want to do reverse exchange. I know I need to do something, but that's not necessary. As long as you're in escrow, it's fine. The only caveat or thing that you might do differently if you're planning on doing a reverse exchange while you're making offers is to make the offer under, blank name, whether it's your name or an entity or assignee, because we're going to have to put it into that special purpose entity for a time being.
I'd say they're thinking reverse. They're talking a month in advance, 2 months in advance for them to make it. Because that's
and it takes
a tricky
a
one.
minimum of 7 days to form the entity, get the legal docs done. So there's more of a runway that's needed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
On the 1031 exchange, on the new property you're purchasing, how many days a year does it need to show being rented?
Great point. So it doesn't have to be rented necessarily, and I have a caveat to that. So you could buy land as an investment. You could buy a shack in PB that's uninhabitable with the goal of making it habitable one day. That can be an investment, right? However, the IRS for residences, the IRS has 3 different types of classifications that they put it as. One, right, primary residence, where you live, right? Second is investment property. Third is vacation home or second home, right? So with the rise of short-term vacation rentals, what's the difference between a investment property and a second home? Where do you draw that line? The IRS has come out and said, oh, we know where we're going to draw that line. We're going to draw it if you stay there 14 days or less, then it's an investment property. If you less than 14 days is an investment property. 14 days or more, then it's a second home. It's a vacation property.
It's not how much it's rented, it's how much it's used.
Yes, correct.
By the owner.
Yes.
My wheels have turned on this one too. So let's say you have a house and there's a couple $1 million worth of equity in it.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It seems to me a really smart move would be move out of that house in advance if you're really planning this thing out.
Yep.
Move into maybe another property you own.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Rent that thing out for whatever the required amount of time is. and then sell it so that you could take your 500 grand out as a married couple, 1031 exchange the rest into another property, and not have to pay any taxes. Because if you have this thing with a couple $1 million of equity, and you sell it and then move into another property and you got to pay taxes on that 1.5.
You're 100% right.
So what's the rule on that? Like how long does that have to be a rental before you can manipulate the system and not pay taxes on that stuff?
So
then you can take loans out.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff. I mean,
absolutely.
You can avoid some taxes.
All the taxes.
Yeah.
So the tax code actually doesn't talk about time at all. What it talks about is your intent or its status.
Yeah.
So and plus the IRS doesn't know what we do on a day-to-day basis. Like they don't know that we're here unless one of you is Al Capone. Which hopefully that none of you are. I'm not. So you just need to have reported it on at least one tax return as a rental property.
Okay.
And then the following year, you can do a 1031 exchange. So it doesn't have to be necessarily that long.
Yeah.
And that becomes more of a CPA question, like what does it take to qualify to report on your 2023 tax return as an investment property, right? So once it's reported as an investment property, then you can do the 1031 exchange. Now, on the other side of that, people say, okay, what if I want to move into this property, or what if I want to fix it up, maybe add some value at some point because it is an investment, and maybe at some point realize that value at some level. So the IRS has come out and said, okay, in section 1031, it only talks about intent. You have to have a property that you use for business or investment purposes that you're selling, and you have to buy a property that you intend to use for business or investment purposes long-term going forward. Well, how do you clarify your intent, right? So they said, okay, if you hold on to that property for 2 years after doing a 1031 exchange, most of the time, we're not going to question your intent. Most of the time, we feel like that satisfies your intent. However, that's not a hard rule in stone. A lot of times CPAs or otherwise are like, oh, you just have to hold for 2 years. And that's not true. There's a court case where there was a developer that was buying a property and they were going to fix it up and sell it, and they were kind of loud about it. There were some articles. They were really proud of it. It was a trophy property. They said, oh, we're going to fix it up and sell it. And then they ran into some environmental issues. So they ended up taking them 6 years. So in the 6 years, like, oh shit, well, we definitely can 1031 exchange. It's longer than 2 years, right? Yeah. The IRS said, no. Your intent was clearly communicated loudly in the beginning. We're going to disallow this. They went to court and the IRS won. So it's really about your intent, but if you don't document your intent, it can become a he said, she said, how do you prove your intent kind of a thing. And so the IRS said, in that situation, if you hold it for 2 years, we feel like that satisfies the intent kind of guideline. Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind, right? So a lot of times we're seeing today, though, somebody that says, hey, I've got this investment property. I literally talked to someone yesterday evening, and I'm like, yeah, so I don't want to retire in California. I've got this investment property. It's got a ton of equity in it. What happens if I buy something in Florida and then in like 5 years, maybe move into it? I said, well, today your intent has to be told for long-term investment purposes. However, in 5 years, should your intent change, which it may or may not, I don't know, that's fine. You've satisfied that 2 years, right? You've proven your intent, and a change of use is not a taxable event, right? So to pay taxes, typically you have to have money that's received. So if you just change the use from an investment property to a primary residence, there's no taxes that are incurred. You can continue forward.
That's not a trigger to the
Not a trigger.
Yeah. Is it a minimum 2 years, but it's really 2 years in intent?
Yeah, totally.
Is it a trigger if you were to buy an investment, you do a 1031 exchange, and you were collecting, 40 grand a month or 40 grand a year rent on your current property, then on your new property you're getting 2 grand a year?
No.
So anything that they're looking at to make sure?
No, they're not there to penalize you if you make a bad investment decision, right? Okay. They're not going to reward you for making a good one. They're not going to penalize you for making a bad one. All they're there to do is to say, if you get money, I get money, right? They're like the mafia. If you get paid, they want their piece. If you go from making $40,000 a year to $20,000 a year, if you're paying 30% taxes on that, they get a little bit less money, but it's not a trigger or a problem. You certainly could sell a shopping center and buy 100 acres in Idaho. Right. That's clearly an investment. As long as you were, not planning on using it for, as a reason for buying it. So that is a question a lot of times people have is like, oh, well, what if I rent it to an extended family member? It's like, well, the IRS doesn't care who you rent it to. They're not going to run, rent comps. They don't have that ability. So one of the things that was interesting to me when I got in this business was the amount of information that the IRS collects. So there's a half a page of information they collect. It's on Form 8824. They ask for someone to write a description of what they sold, write a description of what they bought. So that's trying to determine if it's real property, right? Before 2018, you could 1031 exchange into airplanes, you could 1031 exchange into art. You can't do that anymore. Wow. So now it has to be real property, which basically if you pay property taxes on it, it usually qualifies as replacement property, as long as you have the use as a qualifier to that, business or investment. So those are the first two things. They want you to write, what did you buy? What did you sell? What did you buy? The next, they want the dates. They want to make sure you did it within 180 days. Thirdly, they want the 45th day that you report, or the actual date within that 45 days that you reported to the 1031 exchange company the properties that you may or may not have, end up purchasing your identification. That's because they want to make sure you used a 1031 exchange company. And then lastly, they ask, was this a related party transaction? Are you selling with a family member to swap tax basis? And if you are, then they ask you a couple more questions like, are you trying to hide your taxes, so on and so forth. But if you're not selling to a family member, that's pretty much what they collect. They don't ask, what type of loan did you get? They don't ask, what are market rents, right? They don't ask any of those like actual real estate questions. So there's no mechanism for them to collect like, was the loan a hard money loan, a long-term loan, a family member loan? They're not collecting, did you buy a great deal? Are you renting it under market? They don't even have the mechanism to receive any of that information, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. I was blown away by that.
And so then you can go from single family home to commercial. You can go from commercial to single family home. You can go from commercial to raw land as long as those values are there. And even if the value isn't there, it's just going to get taxed in the portion where you're not getting hit. It doesn't matter what the receipt of income is after you purchase. You can do any of that. It's just has to be real property.
You're paying attention. I like this. Yeah, you're 100% right. Yeah. So, and sometimes people think like, oh, if I sell single family, it's a like kind. Yeah. But the IRS defines like kind as real property. Yeah. So I just tell people, you pay property taxes, usually works.
Yeah, a common question that I get is 1031 exchanges are for owner-occupied properties as well, private residence, and the answer is always no.
Right.
There's a caveat where you can do a partial, but some people think that, but it's just never the case. It's only investment properties.
So yeah, and I try to always kind of lead with that too, saying, hey, there's two parts of the tax code, right? Section 121 if it's your primary residence, Section 1031 if it's an investment property. Yeah. And then, a lot of times we do see in some of the coastal areas where people who have lived in their property say, hey, I've got 2 million, 3 million worth of gain, I'm going to move out, let it be a rental for a little bit, and then I can do a 1031 exchange and put money in my pocket. Yeah. That can be, really powerful. Or I did an exchange a little while ago for a gentleman that he was a hairdresser and he'd bought a fourplex like 20 years ago, close to PB, and he lived in one of the units, rented out the other 3. So he sold it for $2 million right on the dot. So he was able to take $500,000 tax-free, put it in his pocket, and his basis was, I think, 0. So because he'd owned it for so long, so $500,000 in his pocket. He took the other 1.5 and he bought 3 single-family homes. Wow. So that was a home run for him.
Was that pre-2008 stated income?
No, that was it was January of 22.
Oh.
Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what I actually don't think he got a loan because I think he paid off the loan on the fourplex, so I think he literally got like 1.5 in cash, and so he just went. And I don't think he bought here. I think he was from Detroit, so he bought in Detroit. Just bought 3 single-family homes. And he's like, okay, Brandon, what if I move in to the home, then get it to qualify? And he was an older guy. I was like, man, if you wanna move to Detroit, 5 years from now, because you can only do the 121 exemption every 5 years to get that full 500.
Yeah.
So in his situation, he could have every 5 years moved into his property, so wait another 5 years, sold it, gotten the 500,000 tax free, moved into the next one, sold it, so over a 15-year period, he could have pulled all the money out totally tax free. Also, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Like, so much work. I'm 40, and that's a lot of work for me.
Yeah, that's a huge red flag. 'Cause I've told so many people that, hey, buy a house, live in it for 2 years, roll it over to the next house, live in it for 2 years, roll it over to the next year. You only get the 121 exemption once every 5 years.
So I know this because I get a lot of business from a couple of CPAs.
Yeah.
And I'll call them sometimes, just ask questions and talk through things. And he's like, yeah, this person, they were trying to take their second 121 and they only got a partial.
Yeah.
So there's some formula, and I don't exactly know what it is, but you don't get the full 500. Like if you do it over 2 years, you still qualify for something, but it's not the full 500. And there's some formula involved with it.
That because that's
Yeah.
I've been telling them for a year. 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. Just keep rolling it over.
You get some, but it's not the full 500.
Okay.
Yeah, and now that tax season's almost over,
there might be one available to talk to.
definitely be one. I've got some good ones you could talk to too.
Yeah.
The ones I know, they won't even talk to me till the 15th, and then they're gonna take like a week vacation. So,
100%.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think that's most of the things. Those are the 4 key things we talked about, right? The time, the value, the financial, continuity of ownership. Talked about reverse exchanges, how that's done a little bit different. How you can combine the 121 with the 1031. I'm glad to talk through anything with anybody at any time, but hopefully that's enough for you guys to have conversations. And like my friend who ended up getting really hosed by the window situation, right? She should have sold. I think that can be powerful if we can go out and say, hey, you can do this tax free and get so much more income, right? The cost of debt is certainly up, but it can really be outweighed by the increase in income. So if somebody's really stuck on, I have a 2 or 3% loan, I don't want to get a 7% loan. It's like, okay, that's fine. What if your income goes up by 350% and your debt goes up by double? What does that math look like, right?
That's a great little tutorial.
So hopefully it helps.
And this is not 1031 exchange, but what's the rule? I just had a thought. Will come back to me. Okay, sorry.
Cool.
There we go.
Well, that's pretty much everything I had. Yeah.
Oh, do you have a PowerPoint presentation that kind of outlines these things? Or is there another thing that, because we're going to be asked questions. Great notes.
I'll send an email that outlines everything. I also do have a PowerPoint.
Okay.
It literally just has the 4 points listed.
Yep.
I can send that too, no problem.
That'd be huge.
Yeah, for sure.
Throw it out to all you guys.
Yeah.
Our notes in the video will always be available as well, but it'd be great to have some quick notes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important.
Or you just call Brandon and just...
Just call me. I'll just fix it.
Here you go.
I'll just fix it.
Contact information, so everybody has it. You guys want to put your contact information there?
Yeah.
Brandon Burns, and cell phone number is?
Give you my personal cell, which is 214-280-0908. And then my email, brandon@vanguard1031x.com.
Yeah, that was really good info. That's great. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And the cost of an exchange isn't very much. Like I said, $9.95 when you sell, $2.95 when you buy. So, I don't have a wife, I don't have a dog, I don't have a kid. So just call me anytime. That's why I pick up. I don't have anything else to do. So sounds like a lot of work. So I'd rather do this.
How expensive they are.
They are.
I thought you were going to say it's like $5,000 for exchange.
Oh! I thought you were talking about dogs. Dogs are expensive. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so the reason that they're not very expensive is because that there are very few companies that only do 1031 exchanges. So my company only does 1031 exchanges. I'm biased. I feel like that makes us a little bit better. But because it's a lower price point, it's usually a subsidiary of a larger company. The largest kind of title escrow 1031 type companies in the space are Fidelity and First American, right? So like Fidelity and title insurance is the most profitable insurance in the world. So most insurance looks at future events, health, life, auto. What's the chances we're going to have to pay? Title insurance looks at the past. So while I think title insurance is very, very necessary, with the data that we have today, it doesn't have a lot of payout. So it's like 99% profit. So when a title company looks at things, they say, okay, we want more. If we have an item, if a publicly traded company looks at things and say, we have an item that's 99% profit, that's the item that we need to do more of, right? So they have a 1031 exchange company, and their 1031 exchange company isn't there to really make money. Their 1031 exchange company is to make sure that they get the title policy on the replacement property. So they kind of artificially keep the prices for 1031 exchanges low. But because they're so big, if I go and say, okay, it's going to be $5,000 for an exchange, everybody's like, well, Fidelity's 1031 exchange company will do it for $1,800, so I'm going to use theirs, right? So that kind of artificially keeps the prices low. The cost of an exchange just in general is usually $1,000 to $2,000. I think we're a little bit on the lower end. There are a couple of companies that do it less than $1,000, but those companies are only doing that to cross-sell other items. They're going to either really work hard to get the brokerage, the lending, whatever else it may be. They're like, we'll do your exchange for $500 as long as you do a loan with us, or because otherwise you just can't make any money, right? So I think because all we do are 1031 exchanges, and that's where we make our money. Don't have a real estate license. I don't want to be a lender. I don't want to be a broker. I just want to be like the best I can at my business, So,
cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Appreciate
Cool.
it.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah. No.
Sir,
Good to be here.
you guys got